Good morning. From my phone. I was the brilliant genius that didn't print it out. So surface tension by Tess Baumberger. A close-up of a bubble in a hemisphere radiant with teal, indigo, fuchsia. Of course, there are people behaving badly during this pandemic, using it as an excuse to practice prejudice, to hoard, to blame, using it to divide and weakens, cashing in on surface tensions for their terrible benefit. The news daily shows its heavy things. In nature, surface tension gathers water molecules together so tightly that they form a sort of membrane across which light things can dance. Weeds, insects, the wavering sun. It is why rain falls in discrete drops and babies can blow bubbles. Surface tension makes life possible. It helps drops collect along subtle edges of pine needles or leaves, run down to water roots, and help sap rise to nurture those same. Gatherers, sun and water, bitter tannins and chartreuse mosses increase the tension so larger drops can held aloft by their fragile beauty until they can be absorbed and used to foster new life. Here's the other picture revealed by the pandemic. People are reaching out in kindness and concern to acquaintances, neighbors, strangers, creating awkwardness, revealing watersheds running through the tiny capillary but human hearts, minds, homes, streets, and neighborhoods. Could the bitter tannins cause such large drops to form and scarcely hold them up until they can be absorbed, or until we can use them to foster life? Let us open ourselves wide together so we may send them to the suffering, the grieving, the caregivers, and all the workers who always were us. Let us send them across all those furious divisions, because there is a deeper, humbler, more beautiful truth. We deeply need each other, especially now. We can pull together across distances to form a surface across which light things can dance and which can nurture life. About a monk whose story means a great deal to me. But in our current political environment, it's not enough to do good. One must be good. And for all too often, the moment one is celebrated for their good works, their personal image is examined for any kind of imperfections. Signs which, if glared upon brightly and loudly enough, are sufficient to shame that person back into an authentic community. As a result, too many people who might find their calling in service are finding that prayer muted by fear of the public they would serve. Remember when the Me Too moment was just getting started, and a few male actors voice their support, and then somebody came back, well, 20 years ago you said the wrong thing to someone, so we don't want to hear anything about that. Which, everybody's entitled to do, but the answer universally was that I'm out. One way to cut off allies from your own cause is to insist that they have your protection. Now, the Greek called this ophrikai, calling someone out with sin. We know it as ostracism. A scripte were the type of shattered poetry fragments that they actually used to cast this particular vote. So that's where the word would come from. It doesn't seem like it takes too much to currently draw such iron. I am thinking of J.K. Rowling, not me, with being or development, the truth about the abuse a child star is subjected to. Being important for being a human stress ball in a New York restaurant. It's easier to land on this list than folks tend to think. And so you're thinking of the cancel culture and all those things, you know, I think I'll go wonder, could the Buddha be canceled? You know, something to be said for dying 100 years before people write anything about you. You can gloss over some of the rocky points. But it is tempting to think of him as spirit of perfection incarnate, you know. There's still, we don't have anything contemporaneous with him to say this guy was around. We have some ownership records that suggest he could have been there. But he can't have always been enlightened. It wasn't enlightened when he was young. It's more difficult to imagine him as his own Buddha in training. You know, if this were the old days, it'd be like TMZ reports Hindu prince abandons wife and child, walk in the woods. You know, and Twitter takes a dim view of such life choices. But we do have some idea. We have a story from the Pali Canon about one of his attendants, Sagata Thera. A man gifted with powers of concentration and a remarkable power of will. What happens when those powers encounter moonshine is one of those stories that might help us see not only the value of moving past imperfection, but celebrating what it means. So to tell this story, I have to define what ED means. I, it basically means the powers derived from meditation. And I'm not exactly sure what this means, despite my years among Buddhists, but it's part of the non-Buddhist mystification of meditation. You know, can he levitate? Can he read my mind? If he touches a dead plant, does it come back alive? You know, things like that the movies show us. And these are actual questions that get posed to Buddhists. As silly as they sound, it's not so quick to dismiss. Now, most American Buddhists don't emphasize transubstantiation of souls, you know, reincarnation. And they take a dim view of the supernatural unless it comes to meditation. The idea of cultivating your own id is an attractive distraction for many American Buddhists in their early years of practice. That brings me to Sagata Thera. I know the story pretty intimately. In fact, my foundation, the Sagata Thera Foundation, allows me to scholarship some people who couldn't otherwise afford the treatment I offer people and Sagata Thera, I mean, the brother had he was an assiduous student of meditation and very good at everything I imagine we used to see it today. You know, even meditation, people who have meditated for just a few years generally can exert influence on their pulse and blood pressure. You know, they can be indifferent to very loud noises. And my favorite, which I actually teach to clients, is to warm parts of your body, starting with your hands. And just by thinking, it's a meditation called sumo. And your loved ones melting icy blocks on your shoulders, that's what sumo is. They actually have competition, and they can use I thought this is a fun thing to do. It's like, yeah, I'm boss, bring it on. But to really further understand Sagata Thera's tale, I'd like you to imagine the great American spiritual document, Roadhouse, where Patrick Swayze is hired as a bouncer to clean up a bar near Kansas City, only to discover a local businessman has taken over the town with sluggish behavior, and he's growing ever more violent. And the guy thinks it could be worse, because after all, thanks to him, J.C. Penney's going to open it down. And real life in that movie but it also stars a very fit Sam Elliott, which people wouldn't expect, you know. But he's an unlikely king of all bouncers. Got great lines like Bruce Stoney, And we will just do the job. But it turns out there was a town back in Buddhist land that was run by such a guy. I mean, they call him, and he's the closest thing that would come at this stage to a local crime boss. And he's leaning on the monks and he's terrorizing merchants and basically says, hey, you want to stop me? Have the Buddha come over. And he's asking for Patrick Swayze to come. And the Buddha, knowing a dumb challenge when he sees it, because if he wins, he's supposed to, right? He's supposed to win. If he loses, it's nothing but, Twitter feed, TMZ, all that. Right? So, he sends a representative, and that representative was Thera. And just a quick word about the Pali Canon. That's the Theravada text where the story originates. Over 2,000 years old, and it comes from a variety of streams and sources, from Sri Lanka all the way into China. I mean, it's just an assemblage of what's been written or said about the Buddha from a Theravada perspective. And there are scholars who are deeply committed to understanding what belongs there, what didn't belong there, what's apocryphal when it was written. But this story just happens to be there. And it reads a lot like, Plato reads, because there's a lot of things that are so abstract that you're waiting for detail. But this is a spiritual way of thinking that has four noble truths which derive to eightfold paths, which each derive to four different things. It just keeps going. You can't find all those capials quickly. And then, so the story is a little bit vague like that, but then occasionally it's very oddly specific about things you wouldn't expect, and it's fun to see as a translator. But according to the canon, the Sagata heads over, confronts the Naga. We don't know what he said, but after all, why tell us that? And defeated him in a head-to-head eating flex. I'm a meditator of some experience. I'd love to know how he did it, but it did. And so it makes me wonder if there's like this Asian version of let's get ready, let's rumble. Didn't say. But what it does say is that after he finished, and the guy said, okay, I don't need that. I'll be better. On his way out of town, for some reason, word travels, and all the townspeople saw him. And it happened so quickly, it was almost like there was a press release, but how does word of mouth proceed is excellent. Did the Naga tell everyone he was a real winner and Sagata was a loser who worked with Venezuela to help him secretly win? We didn't know that. But everybody that the Buddha passed wanted to share their village's primary product, which was very specifically described as a white liquor called grasshopper. Can't tell us how he wins, but you can tell us what he drank. Sounds like commercial programming to me. But Buddhists have some conflicting rules for monastics, and lay Buddhists said, despite knowing that nobody around the Buddha drank alcohol, he was comfortable refusing it. But a rule of thumb in Buddhism is also that a Buddhist accepts what is offered. And refusing an offering is like showing up to a BBQ or a barbecue, pissed off that the host didn't make a vegan brisket. It becomes about you, not your host, not the gift, not the hospitality. And it's rude. If anybody makes vegan brisket, I'm so sorry. I love it. So he accepted it. He passed another house and accepted. I don't know, because the Pali Canon doesn't mention distance as well, or how many passed, but he accepted for each one. And he was drunk as a skunk as he approached the gate to the bar. And you ever notice how a boss has the ability to show up at your cubicle precisely when you have the dumbest stuff on your street? Stuff you wouldn't tell your family about. Boss that comes up there, hey, what's that? The Buddha was passing at the gates with his posse of arahants. Arahants is the fancy word for his apostles or followers. When Sagata just finally brought to a heap on the ground, probably from seeing the Buddha. But the Buddha and his boys were back in town. If this happened on a film set, TMZ would be all over it, and Sagata would be canceled. But Sagata wasn't done. As the Buddha approached, Sagata turned in his drunken sleep, and his bare feet wound up being pointed straight at the Buddha. To this day, the meditation police, people who've been meditating for 2 minutes longer than you have, is what it generally is. But the meditation police get on beginners for doing this by accident. You don't want to sit and suddenly you're the teacher and have all these feet pointed at you. That's even today, it's pretty rude. But Sagata would have known this. He would have done it deliberately. So what does the Buddha do? I mean, all of his arahants are watching him, as well as TMZ and all that stuff. So he's got to figure it out. And he asks, he doesn't say anything to Sagata. It doesn't wake him. He turns and he says, is this the great Sagata Thera, whose Ichi is so powerful it makes Nagas tremble? Yes, Buddha, it is. It should be mentioned that the arahants are almost exactly like most of the characters in Plato's early dialogues, which means they only exist to give the reader 50 different ways to see, yes, you're right, Socrates. I hadn't thought about that, Socrates. Oh, you don't say Socrates. It's not great, right? Plato got better, but with the symposium, but it took a while. But the Buddha wasn't done. He looked back and said, could he overpower a salamander in this state? And yes, the word is salamander. It's very specific, and multiple translators have decided that's exactly what he meant. Again, weirdly specific about some details. Could he overpower a salamander? And of course, one of the Buddhists, so the arahants all say, no, Buddha, he cannot. And Buddha had more to say. Is this Sagata Thera? He was so polite and respectful to all, no matter their station, position, or goal. Yes, Socrates. I mean, yes, Buddha. He really is. Well, look upon this insult, and we do. Now, imagine waking up the next morning with a rage or a grasshopper and realizing you made an ass of yourself in front of the Buddha. It's got to motivate some unpleasant feelings, but Sagata Thera asked the Buddha to forgive him, and he did. And in that moment, Sagata was said to have had his true awakening and was able to walk beside the Buddha. And from then on, alcohol became a specific prohibition. It actually goes back to that. And the notion was it makes one careless. There's no health warnings, not just the end of the mission, that no matter how much you've learned or have become, they're going to induce a carelessness that we can all see and take advantage of, and it reduces your power tonight. So Sagata wasn't canceled. He learned a lesson. One that not every person has to experience firsthand or learn, but he did. Because he was on his way to becoming Sagata Thera. And that's a complicated path. How many people are walking complicated paths and make missteps? What I love about being a Unitarian Buddhist is that I can draw strength from this story and teaching it to select clients helps them to forgive themselves for some of their decisions while impaired. It's a cliche now, but some years ago, a mentor of mine told me that everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. And that's a great way to foster patience and empathy. It's not what you're on the launch pad, but it's a great way to foster patience. That's why that Buddhist astronaut program just hasn't gone. But we're not on the launch pad nearly as often as our problems convince us we are. We don't do that kind of precision, that kind of perfection nearly as often as we can. So I was feel around fears. And the fears can be plenty in the enormous room. It's E.E. Cummings' book that he wrote about his confinement in France during the First World War. Something he had nothing to do with. His roommate wrote a letter to his father stateside saying the French are terrorists. And the French censors opened it and put them both in jail. Because, what to do? But his initial reaction isn't alarm, even when he sees a piece of excrement floating in a water barrel. he expressed it simply by saying, I was myself. When I awoke, I was myself. Because his fear had been the initial experience, because what used fear to call himself out of himself, to make him careless. I hope we can remember to avoid carelessness and see with empathy those around us who have some, even if they metaphorically do so with their bare feet pointed defiantly at it. We deserve that. We're all works in progress. In our binary thinking that social media promotes horribly, we expect each other to always be completely finished. We expect each other to reflect the wisdom of the Buddha without acknowledging that carelessness is along the way, unless it's to cancel someone who's not as fully formed as we would like. I hope the story helps to see among even the gift of imperfection awaits, and it's okay. Never to know it's going to be good. And on that note, I wish you all great patience and, of course, meditation superpowers.
Now is the time we have congregational response. So if you would like to respond, then raise your hand. I'll bring you the mic.
Also, I can handle questions about Roadhouse too.
No one? Okay. Might reflect a little and explaining better than I can about how the Buddha died at the table and visiting a hut, and meal was prepared for him. They knew the meat was tainted. And
Well, it's the matter of taking what is given. The salient detail I remember about the stories of the Buddha's death, that basically on his deathbed, people are there, hey, what are the last words, what's the great wisdom? There has to have been some tension around that. And first it's just modern stuff. And then, but to say life and death are important things. It just doesn't work to be pressed up now. And you know, that's how you leave it. Not, I'll be back, you know, look out, I'm watching you, you know, nothing like that. It's just, hey, this is important stuff. And who said I got it right? That's what I admire about that story too.
first to say thank you for gracing and pulpit and all the cinema references. But also a special thank you because your story, and particularly the mention of your mentor talking about the battle other people are fighting, in a lovely way made me think of my mother, who in one of her most irritating moments, to me anyway, would insist on giving large tips to bad waitresses because maybe her feet hurt. And we couldn't tell that, so give the tip anyway. Good plan. All right. We are all in favor. So we'll now have our closing hymn number 193. Our faith is but a single gem. Please stand as your own members. Okay.
Now is the time that we extinguish the chalice. And we do that with these closing words from Amy Zucker Morgenstern. We are one. Never has it been more true than now. We extinguish this flame, but the spark within us remains alight. From each of us in our supposed solitude, the signals buzz and hum, sparking through space to one another, connecting us invisibly but palpably. We are one, and our light shines from every window. Our light shines. Thank you.